Okay, thanks for leading the prayers, Jordan. Nice to see you all. So it's the last of the Four Seals. Nirvana is peace. And so these Four Seals, just the review of that is to remember that it's what makes you a holder or proponent of Buddhist tenets, to think that these four are an accurate overview of reality. So this is really the realm of Buddhist philosophy. And it's why I think a lot of people think Buddhism is only a philosophy, because you can think these four seals seem like an accurate description of reality and not particularly do anything with that information. You can just think, oh, okay, yeah, that's how things are. Good to know, right? But if you actually go on to practice something, if you actually go on to start removing what are the causes for suffering and developing the causes for happiness, that's where we get into like the Buddhist religion. But that word can be very triggering for people because the word religion can mean many different things. Even in the dictionary, it can have, 3 or 4 or 5 different layers of meaning. It can have the connotation of a creator God, which obviously Buddhism does not believe in. And so then people will gloss practice as spirituality, which could also be true or could also be a good framing. But again, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by spirituality? Sometimes it means kind of an intuitive feeling into something that is profound or deep or vast. Sometimes it can mean something a little negative, which is like to cherry pick the parts of various traditions that are palatable to us and don't confront, right? And you kind of mush it together and make your own thing. And it's tricky because some of assessing whether a path has wisdom that resonates for you or not does depend on that kind of assessment. I'll choose these parts to engage with. These parts are less relevant to my life. And doing that is an excellent way to live if it's engaged with wisdom, if it's engaged with altruism. But those same choices could be driven by ego, and then it's just cherry picking the fun bits for spiritual entertainment, or just cherry picking the easy bits that you feel kind of up to in a given day. So when we're talking about the Four Seals, we're just talking about philosophy. It's not asking anything of you. Yeah, except for an intellectual exercise of, interesting worldview. But in discussing a worldview, I think for most of us, there is an implication of action. What do we do with this information? So let's kind of look at the Four Seals from the viewpoint of how will I engage with these points, or will I engage with these points? Why or why not? And really come at it from a perspective of your best wisdom and your best altruism, not from a place of egocentricness that'll say, oh, this is too hard or too esoteric, I don't like it, or this is easy, I take it for granted, I'm not going to think about it. Coming at it from a perspective of, if it's true, what to do. If that makes sense, yeah? Okay. So, as we've talked about each time, just as the seal of a notary marks a document as authentic, these four systems, meaning the tenet systems, each have four seals or views that mark them as authentic Buddhist doctrine. So if someone says this is Buddhist doctrine, but it doesn't have the four seals, it's not actually Buddhism. It could be something excellent, but not Buddhism, right? So the first one being that all products are impermanent, meaning they change moment to moment. That all contaminated things are miserable or suffering, that all phenomena are selfless, they lack an inherent identity, and that nirvana is peace, a state beyond sorrow. So last time we were looking at kind of the trickiest one, that all phenomena are empty and selfless, that they lack an inherent identity. When we hear empty, we need to finish the sentence in our head of inherent existence. Yeah, because dependent. What makes it empty? It's empty of inherence, independence, self-creation, because it's dependent, right? Not because it's not there at all. So it's not nihilism. It's not even close to nihilism, but it can sound like nihilism just because of the words and the translations. And because emptiness is a non-affirming negation, it's not implying anything. So it's easy to think of it as a vacuous void, but it's better to think of it as a space of infinite possibility that dependently arisen phenomena then arise, including ourselves, etc. So we looked at the way things are dependent, because understanding dependent arising is the easiest way to understand why they are empty. So emptiness and dependent arising are not exactly the same thing, but one points to the other. They're like the reason for each other. So we use the King of Reasons from Lama Tsongkhapa and Nagarjuna, that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence because they dependently arise. Dependence is described in 3 levels. Causal dependency, related to all impermanent phenomena that change moment to moment. They rely on causes and conditions in order to arise, function, etc. So everything that changes is subject to causes and conditions. Things only come together because of a substantial cause and a coactive condition. So that's the first layer that we talked about last time. The second layer was this mutual dependency, which applies to all impermanent things as well as all permanent things. And everything relies on parts and context, in order to be understood, used, viewed, etc. Right? So to say car, there has to be parts of a car to label onto. To say large room, that's only in context or in contrast to a different sized room that you have in your mind, right? So mutual dependency. And then merely labeled dependency is the most subtle understanding. And this applies again to everything, both impermanent and permanent, that they rely on a valid basis of designation and the mind's imputation or labeling to exist, be held in awareness, be engaged with, etc. And I mentioned that these are described really clearly in this book by Geshe Tashi Sering, just called Emptiness, in the Foundation of Buddhist Thought series. So if you're wanting to read more about this particular philosophical premise, this is a nice intermediate level text and intermediate level series to understand it a bit better. And also just a reminder that the view of emptiness is based on various different tenet schools. So the way I'm describing it is going to be from the perspective of the Prasangika or the middle way consequentialist view. But there are other views that also have their validity and point in the right direction. Okay, so here they are again. Do you have questions about the first 3 before we go into the 4th? Or ideas about the first 3?
I have a question.
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of a big question. It's from this Jeffrey Hopkins book, Maps of the Profound.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yay, Jeffrey.
Dr. Hopkins, yes. And maybe you'll get into this, but so I'll just read this quote here. He says, he's describing like the 3 stages of realizing the view. First, nihilistic views are overcome through actions and their effects and so forth. And then the second stage is a permanent, unitary, and self-powered self, as well as the self in the mode of apprehension of the 20 views of the transitory collection, in which the self is substantially existent in the sense of having a character discordant with the characters of the aggregates, are refuted by teaching the 4: impermanence, suffering, emptiness, and selflessness, as antidotes to conceptions that the unclean is clean, pain is pleasure, the impermanent is permanent, and the selfless is self. So it sounds like he's talking about the Four Seals right there. But those antidotes, they don't seem to exactly match the Four Seals. Like, I mean, there's
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up, because the Four Seals are sometimes spoken of without the last one, and in that case the first three are only mentioned without Nirvana is peace, and in that case they're called the three characteristics of existence. So when you hear the three characteristics of existence, or samsaric existence specifically, it is the first three seals, but they're being discussed specifically in the context of practice. So still we're talking about philosophical tenet schools, and we're talking about innate ignorance and the causes of suffering and all of these things, but it's really drilling down into, now what do we do with that information? And the passage that you were reading, it sounds like Dr. Hopkins was speaking from the perspective first of lower tenet schools, where you discuss how everything is empty of being unitary or partless, yeah? And then you go on to slightly more subtle tenet schools, which talk about things being empty of self-sufficient substantial existence. And then the most subtle is empty of inherent existence. So it's kind of would need a course on tenets to unpack those passages, because they each are, empty of true existence, empty of self-sufficient substantial existence. These actually have subtle nuances. They're not all talking about exactly the same negation. So tenets, I recommend class on tenets.
I will let you carry on, but I just had that on burning in my mind, so I thought I would toss it out there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but the takeaway for all of us for that is, when you hear those three of the seals kind of out of context without the fourth one mentioned, those are called the three characteristics of existence. And if they say the three characteristics of existence but don't tell you what they are, it's the first three seals. Yeah, so you'll, same list minus one, which is kind of like the good news one, really. So yeah, it's implied. But was that kind of the heart of your question, Jordan, or was there something specifically that you were curious about? It was just kind of unpacking.
Yeah, I was just trying to put it into context of the Four Seals, and he mentioned four antidotes, but it sounds like there's a little bit of overlapping, and Nirvana's piece isn't explicitly mentioned in there. He's actually quoting or translating Jamyang Sheba's great exposition of tenets. So
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. So, all of the tenet schools talk about the Four Seals, but it sounds like he was drilling down into one of them specifically and talking in terms of antidotes. So it sounds like a book well worth reading again and again, that's for sure. Yeah. And also a good one to, or a good topic to ask Yangtze Rinpoche if you'd ever want to do an overview of tenets, and maybe tenets in tandem with looking at the Four Seals or looking at the three characteristics of existence. I think that would be beautiful to hear him describe how those go. So looking at these again, any bits that you wanted to unpack? I know each one has a lot. But was there any bits that you wanted to clarify before we do number 4? Do you feel kind of up to speed enough? or so lost that you'll just circle back some other time? Julie, did you have one? No, okay. All righty, so we'll go on. Here we go. So the fourth seal, Nirvana is peace. Here what we're talking about is true cessation of ignorance and suffering is possible through the wisdom realizing the emptiness of inherent existence and repeated practice of that. In the Mahayana tradition, we aim even further to complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. So does anyone feel clear about the distinction between nirvana and enlightenment? You have a pithy way of explaining that if someone would ask, what's the difference between nirvana and enlightenment, or the great enlightenment?
Nirvana is when you've removed all the gross obscurations of mind, and enlightenment's when you removed the subtle obscurations or obstacles to omniscience.
Yeah, exactly. So with nirvana, you are not suffering. You are not causing any trouble, right? You're not hurting anyone or anything, and you do have love and compassion and equanimity and joy and all of these things. And the key difference from the Mahayana perspective, and it's important to say it's from our perspective that we describe it this way, the key difference is altruism. So there's love that wishes all sentient beings to have happiness, but then there's bodhicitta that takes responsibility to help facilitate that. There's compassion that wishes all sentient beings to be free from suffering, which is universal in all Buddhist schools. And then in the Mahayana, may you be free of all suffering, and I will take personal responsibility to help facilitate that. So it's this added responsibility, it's this added altruism, and a sense of urgency of sentient beings are suffering now, and we have a limited capacity to benefit them. What would help us benefit them? Omniscience. So it's, as Jordan was describing, when you have achieved nirvana, you no longer have what are called the afflictive obscurations, or the kind of clouds of the mind, or the negative karma of the mind from destructive emotions like anger, pride, attachment, jealousy, all those. You've cleared that, but still there are the imprints of that. And the imprints of that prevent full omniscience. So we call them cognitive obscurations or obscurations to knowledge, but those are not removed until you're completely enlightened or a full Buddha. And with omniscience, then you can specifically know what sentient beings need in an unmistaken way, and you can hold them all in mind simultaneously. So earlier in the path, you'll have various levels of clairvoyance, you'll have various levels of understanding the minds of sentient beings, but you won't be able to see the whole spectrum of their karma and what specifically will help ripen what when. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So nirvana, someone who's achieved nirvana is an incredibly powerful being, an incredibly happy, peaceful being, a loving and compassionate being, but from the Mahayana perspective, they haven't finished their path. Now, Theravadan practitioners or Pali tradition practitioners, foundational vehicle practitioners, might argue that their form of love and compassion also has altruism, and that we're being a little bit ambitious and that perhaps not all beings have the capacity for complete omniscience. They might describe it in a lot of different ways. So it's important to know that this is a very Mahayana person explaining a Mahayana view, and it doesn't mean it's the only angle of this sort of division, that the Pali tradition might describe it differently. And what the Pali tradition offers us in the Sanskrit tradition, or what the Theravadan tradition offers us in the Mahayana tradition, is a strong, strong emphasis on ethics and concentration. We love bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion, the wisdom realizing emptiness. We love these very high and very deep points, but it doesn't mean we have any focus to be able to practice them. Right? We might on a good day, but what the Pali tradition really emphasizes is, if you want qualities to stick and to stabilize, you need such strong ethics and such powerful concentration. So anyway, that's just kind of a side note in keeping, interfaith harmony and keeping an ecumenical approach, and also having a deep respect for all the different traditions, even just within Buddhism itself, that they all emphasize something specific, and there is a benefit and a profundity to that. And it's not about right or wrong. It's much more about what is your affinity and what is going to help you on your path to emphasize. Because for some people, Sure, ethics, sure, concentration, but that's not going to get them out of bed in the morning. They need bodhicitta to get them out of bed and to actually get them on their cushion and practicing, or get them to be focused in their daily life to not harm sentient beings. So even though they need concentration and ethics, that's not enough of a motivator. Yeah, so the Buddha taught all of these different ways of emphasizing on purpose, knowing that we all have different dispositions. So anyway, side note there. So I'm going to speak from the Mahayana tradition because I'm a Mahayanist, or at least an aspirational Mahayanist, which means we're going to talk about the 5 paths, which I think are really inspiring and empowering. Okay, so this is basically your developmental process to achieve the path of no more learning, which is equivalent to Buddhahood or enlightenment. Okay, so these are the developmental stages. So they're called paths, but when you hear path, think pathway awareness, not something external that you're searching for, not something, external that you're grasping at, but some internal state of development, pathways that you're developing. And isn't it interesting that these days when we talk in the materialist world about physical things, we talk about neuro pathways, don't we? Yeah, making new neural pathways, making new neural pathway connections, all this kind of stuff happening in the brain. We're talking here about even more subtle than the brain. We're talking about the mind, pathway awarenesses that we develop. Okay, so the first one is the path of accumulation, and it's called accumulation because you're accumulating merit. So some of you have studied the 5 paths or heard of the 5 paths. What do you think is like the gateway or the catalyst for achieving that pathway awareness where you really want to be accumulating merit in order to become enlightened? What sort of realizations do you think would be necessary to begin that process?
Would you have to take refuge? Essentially, just take refuge.
Yeah, refuge will help. Yes, and I would say, yeah, probably essential. Yeah, essential. Yeah, refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, primarily the Dharma that you've integrated. Those thoughts needed to happen repeatedly and deeply before you enter the path of accumulation. 100%. It also is part of what would motivate you to practice in the first place, right? You have a healthy fear of what your untamed mind will create for you. You have a healthy, conviction or faith in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha being able to help you develop and train your mind, a faith based in reason, a faith based in experience. So definitely you need refuge. Then from refuge, what else? It's like the gateway. Yeah, go ahead.
Realization of bodhicitta at all times.
Yep. To enter the Mahayana path, you need the Mahayana motivation. The Mahayana motivation is bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is Sanskrit, enlightenment mind, or in Tibetan, Janchub Kisem, mind of enlightenment. And the connotation of that phrase is that your mind is directed towards enlightenment, that the purpose of your life and lifetimes is to achieve enlightenment, and that you're wanting to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Yeah, a mind of 2 aspirations. It's a main mind. So when we were talking some weeks ago about the difference between main minds and mental factors, bodhicitta starts as a mental factor, a state of mind, a thought, a conception. You say to yourself, yeah, I want to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. I really do. And then you forget and you go shopping, right? You forget and you drive the car somewhere. And what we're hoping through meditation and study is that you repeat the thought and reinforce the thought with logic and reasoning and experience, so much so that it becomes a main mind. Yeah, so it's no longer just a mental factor, it's become a main mind, a primary consciousness, coloring all of your other states of mind. So then you go to the grocery store or you go driving, and you're driving with bodhicitta. So you're still aware of the signs and the road rules, but at no point has bodhicitta left your mind. It's become uncontrived and spontaneous. So you need uncontrived, spontaneous realization of bodhicitta to enter the Mahayana path, the first path being the path of accumulation. There's another component which is equally important in the beginning. What would you think? To want to become enlightened, what do you need besides bodhicitta?
Determination to be free.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, here's the happy aspiration, bodhicitta. Then there needs to be the aspiration of, what do I need to stop? What do I need to get out of? I need to get out of cyclic existence. I need to cut samsara. So it doesn't mean that you have stopped cyclic existence or that you have cut the root of samsara. It means that you want to, which means you're disillusioned. But you're not just disillusioned like a teenager in their basement, right? You're disillusioned with hope for freedom, a genuine conviction that freedom is possible. So this determination to be free, or renunciation, or wish of definite emergence, there's a lot of translations. This is essential, because if you don't know what you're getting out of, you're going to be kind of messy in what you're moving towards. Yeah. And you're going to kind of bring your samsara along with you on the spiritual path the whole way, and it's not really going to work. So all paths need determination to be free. The Mahayana path needs also bodhicitta, and definitely the basis being refuge. Yeah. So say you've got your bodhicitta, and you've got your refuge, and you've got your renunciation, your determination to be free from samsara. That is a fundamental cognitive shift away from the hustle and bustle of this life, a difference in priorities. You still have your family stuff, you still have your friends stuff, you still have your hobbies and activities, etc. But it's colored by this big picture. It's held by this deeper significance. And when you're living in that way, you accumulate huge amounts of merit or positive karma, mental momentum, directing the mind towards enlightenment. So when you're on or in the path of accumulation, your job is to accumulate merit. And you really want to be focusing on what's going to strengthen that merit-making ability. You want calm abiding, you want special insight. So some traditions develop them simultaneously, some of them talk about them slightly differently than we do, but in our tradition, we discuss them as kind of very separate trainings that you try to do both. Developing calm abiding means developing single-pointed concentration. Developing special insight means developing wisdom, particularly through analysis. So eventually you want to combine calm abiding and special insight. But for us, what we do is we do single-pointed meditations and we do analytical meditations. And maybe even in the same session, we do both. For example, you're meditating on compassion. You analyze, what is compassion? What is the disadvantage of when compassion is not present? What is the benefit of when compassion is present? And you conclude compassion has to be a priority in my life. And that sense of resonance of that is true. I knew it was true before, but I'm really feeling viscerally the trueness of that. You can stabilize single-pointedly then on compassion. But you kind of need to analyze your way into it with lots of words until you can sink into the experience of it and stabilize there. And then if you're really used to it, you could just cut to the chase, right? So we use both tools, even within one session, but we kind of make a division just to help us get organized with our practice. Sometimes you're stabilizing on one thing, sometimes you're stabilizing on one topic with a series of thoughts. Yeah, I think most of you know about all this pretty clearly, but any questions so far? Path of accumulation, what you're up to? You got your on the cushion work, you got your off the cushion work, but you're in, you've got your bodhicitta, which really, if we could achieve bodhicitta and renunciation in this life, we'd really be off to the races, you know, really. And it's possible, right? It's possible for us to develop these two in this life. It just needs to be a priority. And if your whole life is motivated, getting out of samsara and being of benefit to others, so easy to pick up where you left off in your next life. You don't have to waste so much time, fluffing around trying to find your path or trying to get meaning in life. You already know coming in, and you can pick up where you left off, hopefully. Okay. So path of accumulation, you're accumulating merit. Then path of preparation, sometimes it's called the path of joining, but the path of preparation is called path of preparation because you're preparing to see emptiness directly. So you're also developing calm abiding and special insight. It's still conceptual, but it's much, much stronger. And you actually are able to join calm abiding and special insight focused on the emptiness of inherent existence, but it's still conceptual, right? It's still conceptual, it's still contrived, but you're able to join calm abiding and special insight. When you're actually flipping the switch from a conceptual unity of calm abiding and special insight focused on emptiness to a perceptual calm abiding and special insight focused on emptiness, that's when you achieve the path of seeing, because you see emptiness directly. You see emptiness directly. So a lot of people think that once you've perceptually realized emptiness of inherent existence directly, that is nirvana. And we would say it's actually a little ways down the track on the path of meditation, where you're repeating that meditation on emptiness again and again and again, removing those afflictive obscurations. Yeah, the obscurations from afflictive or negative states of mind. So the path of meditation, this is where you hear this conversation about the 10 bhumis or the 10 grounds. So the path of meditation can be fairly long. The path of seeing is just one session. The path of meditation is repeating that session again and again and again. So when you're on your cushion, when you're in meditative equipoise on emptiness, only emptiness appears. But it's motivated by bodhicitta, it's informed by renunciation, but only emptiness appears. And then out of meditative equipoise and subsequent attainment, there is a process of continuing to see things as empty, even though you can't see it. You remember that it is. The spell has been broken. So you can still be living a normal life, but you're not buying into what samsara is selling. It just naturally, the spell is broken. And so you continue to work, with the 6 perfections, generosity, and so forth. You continue to reinforce your understanding of reality. And then you go back into meditative equipoise. And each time you meditate on emptiness, you clear eons and eons of negative karma. It's purification on a scale that we can't even imagine. Right now, we can purify at the end of the day and stop our negative karma from multiplying. We can even burn the seeds so that they can't give rise to suffering, but we're not really doing anything with the imprints, and it's a little hit and miss depending on how convincing our motivation is to ourselves and how deep our motivation is. We are able to purify, and we need to, but once you're on the path of meditation, it's like you're taking a blowtorch to those seeds, and it's just tons of purification every time. So you remove the afflictive obscurations on the first 7 grounds of the path of meditation. And then the last ones, you remove all those cognitive obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience or knowledge obscurations. You clear those in the last 3 grounds of the path of meditation. And then you have the path of no more learning. So no more to learn because omniscience or full awakening has been achieved. So here you're a complete Buddha, you're fully enlightened, you're completely omniscient, and you can be of benefit to all sentient beings in a direct way. And when you've achieved this path of no more learning, you have those 4 Buddha bodies, right? Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, the Jhana Dharmakaya, the Swabhavika. Sometimes we just say the 3 kayas, right? Truth bodies and form bodies. There's lots of different ways of divvying them up. But basically, when you're looking at the bodies of a Buddha, the form bodies, meaning the emanation and enjoyment body, those are the result of all the merit that you've practiced. and that is for the benefit of all sentient beings. The truth bodies, or dharmakayas, that's the result of all of your work on the wisdom side of the path to realize emptiness. And those are for your own sake, your own freedom from suffering. Okay, so there's all the paths, and I think I'll just leave that on the screen for you guys to look at. And we'll have kind of a 10-minute break, but I'll leave it on the screen in case you want to peek. And then we'll do a little tiny bit more, and then a meditation and some Q&A and stuff like that. So let's have a 10-minute break, and I'll just leave that on the screen for you guys to look at.
I have one question, Venerable.
Oh, yeah. Are we all back?
Not sure. We are all back here, but I don't know about in internet land. Everybody's there, but looks like people are there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for you to say again what the meaning of path is, because I think it's, I don't know, I found it helpful, but I feel like I need to hear it again. You know, the 5 paths, you know, it's the difference between an external path and an internal path, and you had some good words there.
Oh, yeah, sure. I was saying that it's useful to think of it in terms of pathway, yeah, or pathway awareness. Pathway kind of connotes that there's an internal developmental shift that's happened. You know, in I guess everyday psychology, I don't know, for lack of a better word. Excuse me, in everyday psychology, we might talk about cognitive shifts or developmental stages. We're kind of used to frameworks like that if we've been around psychology. You know, like when you're 7 or 8, you know, you kind of have a developmental shift, and then when you're, you know, 21 or whatever, developmental shift, and things happen with your brain and stuff. So if you kind of think in parallel terms, the subtler level of the mind, that the subtler level that is not the brain at all also goes through cognitive shifts, where you go from getting it to getting it deeply and viscerally and spontaneously and uncontrived. So I guess the big difference is when it's contrived and you still believe it, you know, whatever it is, bodhicitta or renunciation, you believe it, you understand it, you try to live by it. But at a certain point, you've done it for so long that it goes without saying. Yeah, it goes without saying. It's your default. It's how you operate now forevermore. You don't have to conjure it up. You don't have to remember it. It's there continuously and present. And then you have all the other thoughts and emotions, whatever, but they're colored by that. So it's like you can't unlearn it at a certain point. You know, and maybe if we think about when we were like brand new Dharma practitioners and we came across even just compassion from a Buddhist perspective, wanting others to be free from suffering. And we thought, I love that. I believe that. I wish that. I knew it even before I met Buddhism. But then you would act against that. And then later kind of reflect and be like, wait, no, I wanted to live this other way. I believe these deeper things. What's wrong with me? And, you know, nothing wrong with you. It just wasn't habituated enough to kick in as often. So these pathway minds, they're built through repetition, but repetition that is experience-based and logic-based and has strong grounding in focus and ethics, because that'll make it sink in.
So the paths, I mean, they're presented in a definite order, which almost kind of implies that it's kind of linear, like you don't jump forward or backwards. And at the same time, I have a little confusion because, you know, for example, in the Theravada tradition, there's no explicit teaching on bodhicitta. So conceivably one could realize emptiness in that tradition without necessarily, accumulating. You'd have to have some merit, but I don't know. I'm just trying to think about the ordering of the paths and how you.
They're presented in a linear way.
Yeah.
They are not necessarily realized in a linear way, except you have to have realized emptiness before you can go on to the path of meditation. There's the foundational vehicle path of meditation, there's the Mahayana path of meditation, but both of those rely on having realized emptiness directly. The ones preceding the path of seeing, path of accumulation, path of preparation, it's like theoretically, you haven't realized emptiness yet. You're working on the union of calm abiding and special insight focused on emptiness, but it's possible that you realized emptiness first, and that then you realized bodhicitta. There's a certain level of renunciation that's required, I think, in order to realize emptiness at the subtlest level. At the subtlest level. I think that there is, some conceptual realizations of emptiness or coarser realizations of emptiness that maybe don't rely on that. It's a subtle point. There's a lot of views on it, but certainly despite us presenting the 5 paths in this like tidy linear way, that's not always the way it goes for all individual practitioners, certainly not. And it's said that even in the traditional text, that here's the way we lay it out and here's a good way to approach it, but that doesn't mean that's the way it happens. You might have, gone all the way through the Theravadan paths, gotten to Nirvana, and then stopped, and then realized bodhicitta, and then finished your path. And you didn't have bodhicitta until that point. It's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think it's a useful framework for us to kind of think about our own practice. Whatever our level of understanding or realization, I think it's useful to approach it this way of there will be a fundamental shift, and then there will be a lot of work before you get another big shift. That there's a momentum and a critical mass that needs to accumulate before you have a big shift. Because sometimes in our practice, it feels like we're stagnant or we're stuck. And sometimes we are, but it could be actually that we're just in the period of repetition and deepening and haven't yet had that lead to the next breakthrough, but it will, because it's fundamentally repetition. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said 3 countless great eons.
Unless you practice Tantra, right? Yeah, 3 countless great eons from the path of accumulation to Buddhahood, on the Sutra path. On the Vajrayana path, on the Buddhist Tantric path, it can be 1 lifetime of the degenerate age. But, terms and conditions apply, right? There's fine print. But you start to see then, if you are a Mahayanist and you want to become a Buddha for the benefit of all, why practicing something like Tantra becomes more of a necessity because of the speed. It's like, if you just want to stay out of trouble, take your time, right? But if you actually want to be of benefit to others who are suffering now, you want something that's got a lot more energy to it. But saying that, there's also a lot more potential for downfall and a lot more potential for mistakes and kind of getting distracted and pulled off track when you're practicing something like Vajrayana, because if you practice Vajrayana without renunciation, it can actually reinforce samsara, and if you practice it without bodhicitta, it can make you more egocentric. And if you practice it without emptiness, then you can actually become very unstable. So, it's to practice Buddhist Tantra, renunciation, bodhicitta, correct view are absolute essentials. Otherwise, it's dangerland. But I guess when we say 3 countless great eons to become a Buddha from the path of accumulation, that can be kind of daunting. But then you think about the tantric path and you can kind of be curious about it and say, okay, well, maybe I'll investigate. I might not be ready to practice it yet, but maybe I'll become curious about the mechanisms that increase that speed. Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
I have it. It all sounds good, and it all sounds like if I was a nun, it would be possible, but it's very hard to integrate it with the lay life. And I'm wondering what's going through my mind is, do you know when you're really practicing? I mean, you think you're practicing, you think you're doing these things, and I'm wondering if in reality I really am. I mean, is there like a little bell go on? You don't get an A like in the class or something. So nobody's coming back and say, yeah, you're doing it right. Yeah, this is it. This is actually happening. I mean, it's like, I feel like I'm sitting on a precipice that I could fall either way. And I don't know if I'm walking this fine line, and I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And then when you mention these different little fine lines, I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't do that. I don't really understand that. So that I know that I'm way back here, not there. I mean, how do you know if you're on the right track? Because you said it could get worse. And I'm thinking that, how do I know I'm not doing something that's making it worse?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, for all of us, monastic or otherwise, there is no spiritual path without self-awareness, right? There's no progress on the spiritual path without self-awareness. To be able to have the type of introspection that knows what you're up to and what you're saying to yourself and whether it's nonsense or not. But a good criteria is when you meet encounters that would have once brought stress and negative states of mind, you find yourself more stable than you used to be. You find yourself kinder than you used to be. It's going in the right direction. And whether it takes 1 life or 20 lives or 3 countless great eons, you're going in the right direction. And you're doing that, moving from happiness to happiness to happiness to full enlightenment. So if you feel like your level of peace of mind is increasing, that's usually a good sign. If you feel like your excitement and agitation is increasing, even if it's sort of a pleasurable excitement, that is usually a sign that attachment has co-opted your path. Or if there's an impatience that has an edge of irritability, an impatience that has a tinge of annoyance, then anger has kind of co-opted your spiritual path, which is not to say it's the end of the world. You just readjust. And that's what we're doing all day, right? As you start to slip and you recalibrate, and you start to lose some mindfulness or some patience, and you catch yourself through habit, and your powers of catching yourself get better and better just through practice. So the style of life is not insignificant. I'm not going to pretend that living as a nun isn't easier for a spiritual path than living as a layperson, but that's only true for you as an individual if that suits you. Some people feel like being a monk or a nun is freedom. Some people feel like it's prison. Some people feel like it's running full head speed into all of the darkness and light and possibilities and really like jumping into the full spectrum of the human experience and trying to find meaning and purpose. For some people, it's running away and avoiding all of those same exact things. So motivation matters, right? And there are lay people that are far better practitioners than a lot of monks and nuns because their motivation is more settled. And also, when you're a lay person, there's often more demands on your time, or easier to give in to perceived demands on your time, whether it's true or not, that are less necessary or less useful. But again, what is useful, again, boils down to your motivation. So I think that it's helpful to frame your life in terms of when are there periods, either within a day or a week or a month or a year, but periods or chapters where you consciously live more simply so that you can focus more deeply. And then when you go back into all of the hustle and bustle, you have a steadiness that you can carry with you. One of our teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who recently passed away, used to say, if you're working for a Dharma center, which is, like an admin job, like with a million details, it's so hard to run a Dharma center. If you're running a Dharma center, he said, try and do retreat for 1 month a year. Yeah. And also doing 1 year of offering service with the Dharma purpose is the same merit as a 3-year retreat. So really think about the motivation, and don't feel like the details of your life are trapping you unless they really solidly are, and then how to simplify.
Very good. Thank you very much. That's
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, other thoughts coming up for you guys? The 5 paths, do they feel sort of possible? There's a nice summary on Dr. Berzin's website, the Study Buddhism website. He talks about the 5 pathway minds, or the 5 paths, in a nice way. So if you're curious about learning more, it's on the Study Buddhism website, and it looks like it's / advanced studies, LOMRIM, the 5 paths, but I'm sure if you just use the search mechanism, you'll find it. And it goes into nice detail. So it's a beautiful system, and it talks a bit about the tenets as well. So for follow-up, Study Buddhism, Dr. Berzin's website has a lot of good stuff. Also, nice fun fact is to think these 5 paths are touched and kind of connected with when you do the Heart Sutra mantra, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha. Path of accumulation is the first gate, path of preparation, the second gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi. Yeah, so it's roughly like gone beyond, gone completely beyond, so be it, like that. But basically it's the 5 paths. So when you're doing the Heart Sutra mantra, you can think that you're reinforcing the seeds of these. So now, assuming that you guys are not just philosophers, that you're also practitioners or curious about being practitioners, we think a little bit about putting the 4 seals into practice. So when you have the first one, all products are impermanent. They change moment to moment. What do you do with that information, right? That's the question. What do you do with that information? Things change. Good news, bad news, depends on context. Okay. I know that if I am having a hard time, it will change. That can make me relaxed. I can know if I'm having a good time, that will change. That will help me not be too attached. That's useful. But even more deeply, what you want to be thinking here is, if everything is impermanent in terms of products or things that are produced, compounds, this can encourage you to train your mind out of negative habits, to purify past mistakes and develop positive habits. So there's a lot of conclusions you can come to by thinking all products are impermanent. But here's a nice one to kind of get you going. If everything changes, how about I orchestrate positive change? Would you add any other kind of conclusions to this first one? If products are impermanent, what's something useful to do with that statement in terms of thought or practice?
Death meditation.
Death meditation, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whether to prepare your mind for death specifically so you can use the death well, or to remember the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the time of death so that you practice well immediately. Yeah, absolutely. A million things you can do with it, but don't feel like locked into, here's what I have to think or should think. Let your mind play with it and explore, like, what's a relevant conclusion for me in my life if I remember impermanence? What's a useful way of approaching the world that helps me get into that flow state, that can let go, that has broken the spell that assumes fundamental stability is possible in a material samsaric world? You can have your 401k, and you can have your CDs, and you can have your stocks all settled. You can have paid off your mortgage. You can have regular exercise and organic food, and still you could be hit by a bus, and still the market could crash, and everything is, changeable. And knowing that going in can make you a lot more relaxed than thinking, I finally achieved the stability I sought, or thinking that life will be better once you get certain points of stability that may not be possible and maybe never were, and maybe that's fine. you know, and maybe that's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Reducing attachment to material things by recognizing that they're going to break, and you're not going to be satisfied in the way you were when you first acquired them in all their newness and shiny glory.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, remembering impermanence can break the spell of the 8 worldly concerns. You know, it can really help you refocus and reprioritize. And it helps you undercut our innate grasping at permanence. There is part of us that assumes things won't change, despite knowing better intellectually. We are shocked when we see ourselves age, when people around us die. You know, I'm just visiting my folks right now in Montana, and I come back to my hometown and I'm always sort of like, oh, they put more houses there. Oh, they changed that one shop I used to go to. Like, why am I surprised? You know, like houses change constantly, towns change constantly. But, you know, there's part of me that's like, it's different. And the subtle connotation is, and therefore bad, which actually it could be better than it used to be. Like, that used to be an empty lot full of weeds. Now it's a cute little coffee shop for the teenagers. That's good. Yay. You know, but there's part of you that's like assuming stability and permanence and is a little bit disoriented when there's change, despite knowing, of course, it will. So if you can be remembering impermanence, you're not so caught off guard when obvious things shift. And then when subtler things shift, also you can get in that flow state that enjoys it. So it's like these things are self-evident. Adult people know these things, but remembering them on purpose is a useful exercise. And we sometimes forget that knowing is not enough. It's the repeated knowing, it's the knowing on purpose that actually changes the way that we engage with life. Yeah. Okay, so then all contaminated things or all contaminated phenomena are miserable, suffering. So this is always the one that cracks me up because it sounds so heavy when in fact it's actually very useful information. If things are contaminated by karma and disturbing emotions, they're going to be no fun. And so, of course, life is hard because everything in our life is contaminated by karma and disturbing emotions. So it's to be expected. And when things are going well, it's like amazing, how wonderful. So this thought can encourage you to develop renunciation, the determination to be free from cyclic existence, samsara. Yeah, your cyclic existence, samsara, your contaminated aggregates bound by karma and disturbing emotions, your uncontrolled rebirth. You think, if I don't want to suffer, I need to develop this determination to stop the causes of suffering. So all contaminated things are suffering or miserable. How is that useful? How else is that useful besides that? You can zero in on the contaminated part, you can zero in on the suffering part, or the whole sentence. Does it change your expectations of life? If you're like, no, there's a built-in discontent. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
For myself, I used to be a fairly heavy drug user, drink alcohol, but now I've been clean and sober for decades, which I'm happy for. But recognizing the suffering that the drug and alcohol use cause, not only for myself, but for other people.
Exactly.
It's been an experience realizing from day to day really what that caused, the suffering that it caused. So it's, I guess that's just experiencing that suffering and recovery from that suffering.
Absolutely.
And
Sometimes,
maintaining that recovery has been really helpful.
it's
Necessary.
absolutely. And often people in addiction recovery are the best practitioners because they have understood the First Noble Truth. They have understood this seal also. They've understood that the suffering is going to be pretty much a continuous thing in life, but it can be lessened if you lessen the causes rather than put a blanket on it with substances. You know, like it'll take the edge off to use a substance, but it's never going to solve the suffering. It'll actually make it worse. And you know that directly from your life. And it can actually make such a rich practice if you've had those demons in your past. And also really amazing that you've been in recovery for so long. That's so inspiring because, gosh, habits are hard to change for all of us, especially when there's an extra chemical involved. So, I mean, amazing. Absolutely. So when we're looking at the suffering one, you know, looking at just the suffering piece manages our expectations of things. Looking at the causes of suffering or the contamination part helps us stop creating them. So you can actually have greater levels of well-being as you're working towards nirvana and enlightenment. So, you know, I think a lot of the times when we're like assuming happiness will come or assuming a day will be wonderful, we set ourselves up for disappointment because our whole system is wired to be slightly comparing to other moments that were similar or hoping for a little bit better. And we're just like primed to be a little discontent. And sometimes we even talk over the top of our discontent like a cheerleader, like, no, this is great, this is great, this is great, you know, when really there's some part of you that's like, actually, I have a headache, you know, actually, yeah, it's great, but not what I thought it would be, or not as good as I thought it would be. And if you're ready for that edge of discontent, it doesn't escalate or worry you in the same way. And you can look and turn towards the deeper causes of the suffering rather than the surface conditions, which are not really at fault. You know, it's a more empowering positioning. Yeah. Okay, so then the fact that all phenomena are selfless or lack an inherent identity, this can encourage you to develop the wisdom that realizes that cutting the root of samsara and eventually leading to nirvana, and nirvana is a state beyond sorrow. So to be encouraged to develop this wisdom, yeah, and the reason you want this wisdom that realizes emptiness is that it cuts the root of samsara, or it cancels out that second seal. Things don't have to be miserable if you take out the contaminant, which is innate ignorance that doesn't understand reality of yourself and the world and everything. And that will lead to nirvana. And then as Mahayanists, we add the aspiration for enlightenment. So there's your four seals kind of in a nutshell. And, you know, we've been calling it an introduction to the four seals. I think it's important to call it that because there's a huge amount more to be said. But if you just kind of let those four sit now in terms of practice, that's what we'll do with our meditation. So I'll just kind of talk you through an analysis and you play with these ideas internally and see what resonates and lands for you. So if you want to get yourself meditation posture, nice straight back. And just take a minute to be with the body. And let the body settle and relax. Particularly become aware of your spine. And mentally scan your spine up and down, allowing it to come into alignment. And scanning down your seat and your legs and your feet. grounding yourself with body awareness. And then to let surface distractions settle, shift your focus to the breath for a couple minutes. Just the breath. Nothing to add, nothing to subtract. Just a simple focus. And if you notice you've gotten distracted, just gently come back to the breath. Let go of the train of thought or the sensory experience. Not pushing or pulling, just letting it go. And then revive your bodhicitta motivation and your connection with refuge. Just mentally to yourself, thinking you go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until you become enlightened. And through the practices of generosity and so forth, may we become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Letting it reconnect and revive. And with that motivation, now bring to mind the first seal. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. Just repeating that phrase to yourself. What are the first thoughts that arise? Explore that. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. Bringing the understanding of impermanence into my own life could benefit what things? Answering it for yourself in a personal way. Remembering that things change moment to moment could help how? And then shift, thinking all phenomena, all contaminated phenomena, are in the nature of suffering. What does that bring up for you? All contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering, are miserable. What does that mean? What do you do with it? What mental habits would you like to change? What mental habits would you like to keep and reinforce, given this second seal? And then shift, thinking all phenomena are empty, selfless, contaminated and uncontaminated, compounded and uncompounded, people, places, things, absolutely everything is empty of inherent existence because it dependently arises. How does that land for you? What does it ask of you in terms of your way of thinking? What would the wisdom realizing this emptiness do? Do to your everyday life? Do for your spiritual path? What would understanding this third seal lead to? And then settle into the fourth seal, that nirvana is peace, that a state beyond suffering is possible once we remove the causes for suffering and develop even more causes for happiness. And with a mind of peace, we can continue and even develop a mind of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. How does that land? And dedicate the energy you put into these thoughts to understanding, integrating, and developing them to their utmost extent in order to be of greatest benefit to all living beings. Hey, did you have any interesting ideas that came up, or interesting points of connection or confusion? Connection or confusion, either are fine.
I have to realize emptiness if I'm going to stop suffering and help others.
Hear, 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 hear. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. One of my teachers, Geshe Sangye Chinle in New Zealand, he's one of those beautiful old antique Geshis. He was saying, normal antidotes to afflictions help, like patience is the antidote to anger, loving kindness is the antidote to anger. These are all antidotes to negative states of mind. But sometimes if you're really, really wound up, your analytical ability will distort them and co-opt them, and you'll get into a whole spiral of justification and excuses and kind of spin out. But if you're angry and you remember emptiness, it's hard for your anger to like co-opt it. You're like the agent, the object, the action, all lack inherent existence because they dependently arise. So who is to blame? Blame is empty, harm is empty, harmer is empty, harmed is empty. Oh, and it's hard to like stay wound up. So it's an interesting kind of process if you're really, really in an affliction and you've understood the emptiness of inherent existence intellectually a little, not even a realization, right? Just intellectually a little, it can pop the bubble of a lot of afflictions right away. Whereas if you're really wound up, sometimes the sweeter, more straightforward antidotes might not work until you settle down. Yeah, emptiness is really important. Yeah, other thoughts that came up for you guys?
Since learning and meditating on emptiness, I letting go with the flow easier, and I think my day go through more relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah, even just everyday life is more relaxed and also moves towards the final goal. And that's what we want, is moving towards the final goal and also a bit happier today, a bit more relaxed today, both. Yeah, other thoughts? Do you have any miscellaneous questions about any of those points, or questions about ways to follow up or anything before we call it a day? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So there's 2 more Saturdays in August. I'm just wondering what we might explore on this Nirvana is Peace segment that might be fruitful.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you could really look at the concept of peace a lot and ask yourself, what are the ways that you find peace in daily life? What are the ways you find peace ultimately? And kind of just talk through like basic things, practice things, etc. But if you feel interested to look at like the elevated, not just nirvana, but enlightenment, it can be useful to review the 5 paths. The way to peace, basically, the way to peace plus, right? Nirvana plus. So if you wanted to look at the 5 paths and maybe using one of those Alexander Berzin readings could be useful. They're a bit dense, but there's always some really immediately awesome bits and then bits that need to be unpacked a little bit. So the 5 paths are useful. And just again and again, looking at the rest of the seals and how they lead to nirvana is peace if you recognize them. It's like they're true, they're the marks of existence, but what do you do with them to achieve the final? So even just a review of those first 3 and how they lead to the final. So whichever direction feels most appealing to the group, whether it's looking at ways to peace in the 5 paths, or it's looking at the first 3 and how they lead to the 4th, whatever feels most relevant to you guys. And always good to do a meditation on dependent arising whenever possible, particularly for this one. Because if you want to cut the root of samsara, you need to realize emptiness. The easiest way to realize emptiness is via the reasoning of dependent arising.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another question. So
Sure.
we reach to the 4th level, nirvana. So how do we, what is this next step to know that we are in the enlightenment path that we need to?
It's the motivation. It's really, am I doing this for my own sake Or am I doing all of this, the beginning of the path, the before you even enter the path, all of it really again and again, this is for all living beings, particularly those that I have a strong karmic connection with, like my family. And I'm not excluding myself from the group of all sentient beings, but nirvana is kind of for your own well-being and to not harm. Buddhahood, enlightenment, is in order to really be of benefit to all, to help them do the same. So you're not putting anyone in enlightenment or forcing anyone into enlightenment. You're providing tools for them to help themselves, just as we've been helped. So what are the ways to help facilitate people's growth? That's not condescending, that's not patronizing, that's not looking down on them, that's just really seeing their Buddha potential and speaking to that and being with that, rather than focusing on people's afflictions and suffering and bad habits and bad behaviors and rudeness, which is just surface symptoms of suffering. Focus on the best of them and sort of invite it out. But the best thing to do is keep coming back to your motivation for all sentient beings, for all sentient beings, for all sentient beings. Then your own welfare is taken care of as a side effect. You know. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, we'll go ahead and dedicate. John.
To this merit. Go ahead, sorry.
No, you do yours. You do yours.
To this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, and happy practicing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable.
Thanks, guys. We've got Jeremy, Julie, Jane, Mark.
Oh, lots of J's.
Yes, lots of J's. Who's in the room? Who's in Jordan's house? We got Jordan, and who else is in your house?
Lone and Bill.
Lone and Bill. Thank you so much for coming, you guys.
Thank you.
See you.
Great day.
Great day, take care.